For the Love Gun Tour, which began in Canada in early July 1977 after the album was released, he had a private airplane for the first time. It was a Convair 280, a propeller plane filled with odd furniture, almost like a flying junk shop.
All aboard!
The pilot and co-pilot were Dick and Chuck, and our flight attendant was named Judy. Dick and Chuck fought regularly and often yelled at each other in the cockpit, "You asshole, fuck you!" It wasn't very reassuring. Once at the end of a flight, we landed, got to the end of the runway, turned around, and immediately took off again. They had put us down at the international airport rather than the private airport. Another day I saw flames coming out of one of the engines mid-flight. I told Judy to bring Dick back to see it. He came back, looked out the window, and said matter-of-factly, "Don't worry about it."
What?
Then he returned to the cockpit. The whole operation was an accident waiting to happen. The tour itself, however, went gangbusters.
The Japanese tour took up most of March. Love Gun was released in June, and then Alive 2 followed in November. Ace and Peter continued to do the most bizarre things. Ace had a fascination with Nazi memorabilia, and in his drunken stupors, he and his best friend would make videotapes of themselves dressed up as Nazis. At the time, the mayor of New York was Ed Koch, who was Jewish, and Ace showed me a piece of tape where he and his best friend were making verbal threats against the Jew in New York, saying, "We'll cook him up." Of course, he was drunk out of his mind. Paul and I weren't thrilled about that, but Ace laughed at how funny he was when he saw the tape.
They're grasping at straws. I mean, Jesus Christ. My fiancé is Jewish. How could I be anti-Semitic? Is he out of his mind? 40 years in the music business, I worked alongside Jewish people my whole life. And I'm anti-Semitic? It's ridiculous.
Peter, too, was drinking heavily and using drugs. At one point, he went into a club and allegedly demanded that a certain substance be put in front of him in a bowl. The owner of the club refused, so Peter tried to intimidate him, but nothing happened. Again, he was all bark and no bite.
You know, the gang thing in my neighborhood was much different than the gang thing today. There was no drive-by shootings. We didn't have automatics. You know, it was just none of that stuff. It was, and a lot of times it just got settled with one gang leader to another gang leader, one-on-one, winner take all. It wasn't as violent. I mean, it was, you know, Garrison belts and chains, and I was a little gun runner when I was 13, and my grandmother caught me and broke a broom over my head.
The problem was we had to fabricate a Kiss show for the album because we didn't want to repeat material from the first live album. The first one documented a standard set. The second one couldn't because a lot of those songs from the first three albums were still staples in our show. So now we had to create a Kiss show that didn't really exist, with the dynamics of a real show. Even so, it didn't seem like a big deal since we had a lot of great stuff. And once again, we enhanced the ambient quality of the live recording so they replicated the bedlam of an actual show. The onstage explosions caused compression in the microphone, so again, we used recordings of cannons to make them sound right.
You know, I wanted to do Shock Me and some of Ace's early stuff that he wrote that I sang, Strange Ways, and you know, there's a lot of cool Baby Driver, but I would get every night. It just doesn't seem to fit into the show. I get also a lot of fans like, why? You figure it out.
The second problem with Alive 2 flowed from the first. Using only songs from the second three studio albums, the new live album took up just 3 sides of a double album, not 4. What were we going to do? We decided to add a side of studio tracks.
When we finally went into the studio, Ace simply never showed up. We had to use other guitar players like Bob Kulick and Rick Derringer. Ace was more furious than ever. This wasn't the first, nor would it be the last of countless times Ace would turn his back on the band.
We recorded the tracks at the Capitol Theater in Passaic, New Jersey to give them a live feel. Ace didn't play on any of the studio tracks except the one he wrote, Rocket Ride. Instead, we had to use Bob Kulick, who had auditioned for the band during the Cattle Call back in 1972 and with whom I'd remained friends.
Whatever.
You know, I was proud to tell my mother someday I'd play the Garden, and kept that promise to her. When my mother saw me in a rehab, when I was kicking coke and I was in that rehab for 9 weeks, she came up only once to visit me with my dad, and I got a look from her that I'll never forget till I die, that she was so disappointed
I always wanted a gold record, and I always wanted to play Madison Square Garden. I already had my gold album. On February 18th, 1977, we headlined our first show at the Garden, and it was sold out.
If you grew up in New York City to headline Madison Square Garden, you have made it. And that was it. I remember that night, and I remember the feeling. And I'm getting chills right now, and I'm getting goosebumps because, it's a night I'll never forget.
This was a big deal for us. CBS News had a broadcaster named Kaidi Tong. She was one of their big stars then. Ooh. The cameras were all over us. I was close to 7 feet tall in the outfit, and she must have been about 5'2". Her arm was stretched way up into the air to hold the microphone near my mouth. While she was interviewing me, with the cameras all around me, I felt something in back of me. I turned around, and my mom, all 5'4" of her, was trying to fix something to make it look right. I was wearing a thin strip of leather with studs around it, and it ran right through the crack of my butt and connected to a codpiece covered with spikes, and my mother was trying to brush off a piece of lint or clean a spot or something. It was like trying to walk up in back of a tank and take off a piece of thread.
Madison Square Garden was synonymous with success on a large scale. Playing there was big stuff, really big stuff. I was so anxious before the show that I took half a Valium. The idea that I might be sluggish? No chance. The adrenaline high was so strong on a normal night, and this was homecoming in a sold-out Madison Square Garden. I probably could have taken several whole pills and still have gotten up on stage and then run a marathon in record time. Shows like this were still new. I wasn't yet used to the idea that we were this big. After playing 3 nights in a row at the Garden, I knew one thing. What I had thought would fix me had not. If all these people look up to me and see me as special and a star, shouldn't I feel that way? Maybe in theory, maybe while I was on stage, but success and fame and the change in the way other people perceive me hadn't erased whatever was wrong behind the mask.
Some people warm up before they go on, vocally, play scales. I never did any of that stuff. I just go on stage and do it, go into the studio and do it. Boom.
Huh? It wasn't that we were breaking up, but people were starting to need their own space again. We had been together for 5 years, which is coming up on the typical lifespan of a band. The strain was pulling us apart.
We stopped touring. In part, it was because we simply couldn't. Ace and Peter were deeply into drugs and alcohol and alternated between hostility and incoherence. When they weren't incapacitated, they caused headaches for everyone around them. We weren't speaking to each other. We couldn't stand each other. We wouldn't play a gig for more than a year. What do I do now?
But it was also pushing us forward into new projects. First, a Marvel artist named Steve Gerber, who was a big fan, put us in the last 2 issues of Howard the Duck. We were demons who possessed Howard. Marvel noticed that those 2 Howard the Duck issues soared in sales even though we weren't on the cover. So they approached us about a Kiss comic book.
I'm no superhero. I'm a kid from Brooklyn.
Someone arranged for me to meet Stan Lee, the head of Marvel. He was a god to me. We talked and found that we were kindred spirits. He had changed his name because he didn't want people to know he was Jewish, as had I. The wings on my outfit were influenced by a character called Black Bolt that Stan Lee had created. As the Kiss comic book project moved along, someone came up with the idea of putting real blood in the ink. It wasn't me. The comic book, which was published in 1978, became Marvel's biggest-selling comic book. In the mid-'70s, we were popular enough that teenagers and even younger kids were buying our records, and that meant lots of other Kiss products were in demand. Halloween masks, lunchboxes, stickers for school notebooks, pencil erasers. Moving forward with the merchandising changed the complexion of the band. It changed the size of the vision, the shape of our projects, everything. And it wasn't greeted with universal support from the band. Ace and Peter didn't like it.
No.
Because they didn't see the big picture. And even Paul was a little reluctant. Some things he saw as improper in a rock and roll context.
Gene got out of control with the merchandising. And, the lunch boxes, the whatever.
What?
Kids started coming to the concert. and we started out almost like an underground band, and then like, you know, we obviously our following grew, but, you know, we started appealing to younger kids, 5-year-old kids, you know, and my manager would say to me, hey, cool it with the cursing tonight, because, you know, you got young kids in the front row, and you don't want to say fuck. So, you know, that was kind of the beginning of realizing what maybe we were becoming a little too commercialized.
You know, it's nice to make some money. It's great to sell merch. I thought when we were putting out the merch, you know, the little dolls and the little sleeping bags and the lunch boxes, that was very cool. But always it was the music. It was always the message in the music of what we were giving the fans. You know, this is what, you know, Strutter, whatever, you know, Dress to Kill. All this stuff was, you know, tough. We were selling rock and roll.
Paul often would, and still does, shoot down ideas because he's more cautious. He tries to contain what we've got. Though I'm supposed to pick up the phone at all times and discuss new ideas with him, I often don't. I just plow straight ahead and do it. Whether it's Kiss My Ass toilet paper, or history books, or whatever, and later on, Paul and I have words with each other. They're never fatal disputes, though. They're spirited disagreements.
You